Number 9. The Maud. In 1918, famed Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen tried to cross the North Pole on a ship called the Maud through a route known as the Northeast Passage. Unfortunately, he failed, and after several grueling winters at sea, he set his sights on reaching the North Pole in an aerial expedition. Amundsen eventually went bankrupt, and the Maud was sold to the Hudson Shipping Company, which used it as a floating warehouse. It sank in 1930 in Cambridge Bay off the coast of Nunavut, Canada, where it sat for over 80 years before a crew began attempting to raise it. The crew finally lifted the wreck out of the water in 2016 after 6 seasons of trying to retrieve it as part of a project called Maud Returns Home. The team placed the ship on a barge with plans to sail it to Norway. Maud traveled back to her home country the following year via the Northwest Passage, staying the winter in Greenland along the way. Finally, in 2018, the ship arrived back in Norway nearly a century after departing for Amundsen's expedition. At last update, there were plans to build a new museum building for housing Maud, which sits in the waters off the village of Toft, with a protective roof shielding her from the elements. Number 8. The Batavia. The Batavia was a 17th century flagship of the Dutch East India Company, a multinational corporation that once dominated world trade. Sadly, the vessel wrecked roughly 50 miles or 80.5 kilometers off of Australia's western coast during its maiden voyage to Southeast Asia. The ship's commander, Francisco Pelcert, left the wreck site in search of food and water, leaving 282 survivors behind on Beacon Island. He returned 3 months later only to find that total carnage had taken place during his absence. A merchant named Geronimus Cornelis had taken control of the survivor colony and ordered the murder of dozens of women and children. His reign of terror finally ended when Pelcert had him executed along with several other mutineers. The remaining survivors were rescued and the 150-foot-long, 45.3 meters, Batavia sank. It went undiscovered until the 1960s, and the surviving part of the ship's stern section was raised the following decade. It's the only piece of an early 17th century vessel belonging to the Dutch East India Company to ever be removed from the water. Records of where the timber for the ship was sourced are scarce, but a recent study of the wood's tree rings has shed some light on its origins. A team determined that the trees were felled around 1625 in northern Germany and the Baltic region, and the wood was processed shortly thereafter. The researchers also found that the shipbuilders discarded the timber's soft outer rings or sapwood, which is more vulnerable to decay and shipworm infestation. This indicates that the Batavia's builders were skilled craftsmen who were experienced with the type of wood that they were using. In addition to studying the ship, experts are investigating human remains that were buried on Beacon Island. They hope to shed some light on the unspeakable tragedies and other bizarre events that occurred there. Number 7. MV Golden Ray. Built in 2015, the MV Golden Ray was a car carrier with a rather short-lived career. The 660-foot or 200 meters vessel was capable of carrying up to 7,400 cars. It was owned by logistics company Hyundai Glovis, where it ran into trouble near the port of Brunswick off the Georgia coast in 2019. The Golden Ray left the dock around midnight for Baltimore and was at sea for just 23 minutes when she began to list heavily, prompting the port to close. All 23 crew members survived with the Coast Guard's help, but there was nothing anyone could do to save the 4,300 cars aboard the ship, which capsized completely and was declared a total loss. Initial speculation blamed the accident on a sudden loss of stability, possibly from incorrect cargo stowing or water ballasting. There was also a mysterious internal fire that quickly burnt out of control before the vessel turned onto its side, according to a Hyundai Glovis official. An official investigation determined that numerous factors were to blame for the sinking, including incorrect calculations and a portside door that was left open, which caused the Golden Ray to take on water. Nearly all of the ship's 24 fuel tanks were full when she capsized, causing serious environmental concerns. Salvage crews got right to work on pumping what tanks they could and plugging the vents on the others. The entire salvage operation was an enormous undertaking that required the crew to travel to Chile to examine the Golden Ray's sister ship and better understand her layout. A year and a half into the project, only half of the ship had been removed from the water. The crew cut it up in the water and removed it piece by piece, until the entire wreck was finally cleaned up nearly 2 years after it sank. Number 6. Bessie White. Violent storms are often blamed for making ships disappear, but they're also sometimes credited with making lost ships reappear. This was certainly the case for the Bessie White, a Canadian coal schooner that encountered heavy fog and ran aground near Fire Island in New York State. The incident happened in either 1919 or 1922, based on conflicting historical records. After crashing into the rocks, Bessie White began to quickly take on water. Thankfully, the crew escaped on lifeboats. Everyone survived and only one person was injured, but the vessel and its coal cargo were a total loss. Over the following weeks, anything salvageable was removed from the ship, which was eventually swept out to sea. When Hurricane Sandy battered the region in 2012, a large part of what's believed to be the ship's wooden hull was exposed. It had become buried along the shore and was forgotten about until the storm caused it to resurface. Since then, the hull has been covered and uncovered, and it's often at least partially visible. Nobody knows for sure whether the wooden object is from Bessie White, but all signs point towards this being the case. Either way, it clearly belongs to a very old ship that wrecked in the area long ago. Hey, real quick, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Thanks for checking us out. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on more videos like these. Number 5. MV Tricolor. Built in 1987, MV Tricolor was a Norwegian-flagged car carrier that became infamous for getting into 3 crashes in the English Channel over a 2-week period. It all started on December 14th, 2002. While en route from Belgium to the UK with 3,000 vehicles aboard, the boat collided with a container ship called the Kariba. The Tricolor sank in 98 feet, or 30 meters of water north of the French coast, tipping onto its side on the way down and taking its cargo with it. Thankfully, all 24 crew members were rescued safely by the ship that had crashed into theirs. Despite the precautions put in place to avoid another accident, a cargo ship called the Nicola and another vessel, the Vicky, slammed into the sunken Tricolor. As if things couldn't get worse, a few weeks later, a valve was knocked off the Tricolor by yet another ship, and a massive oil spill ensued. In early 2003, a salvage company pumped as much oil out of the wreck as possible. Then, the team spent 3 months cutting the submerged ship into 9 pieces, like cheese, and pulling them out of the water. The thousands of luxury cars that went down with the vessel were removed and destroyed. Finally, towards the end of 2004, the operation was declared complete, leaving what was left of the Tricolor a mere pile of scrap. Number 4. MV Baltic Ace. Built in 2007, the MV Baltic Ace was a Polish-built Bahamian-flagged car carrier with a carrying capacity of 2,132 vehicles. Her short-lived career ended in December 2012 when she collided with a container ship, the Corvus J, while en route from Belgium to Finland. The crash happened roughly 25 miles off Rotterdam, in one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. The Baltic Ace immediately began to take on water and sank in just 15 minutes. A rescue operation ensued, but proved difficult due to bad weather and 10-foot high or 3-meter waves. 13 crew members were rescued by helicopters and other ships. 5 crew members were confirmed dead the following day, and 6 missing crew members were later declared dead after it was presumed they likely got trapped and went down with the ship. It was important to remove the wreck as soon as possible because it posed both shipping and environmental hazards. Salvage operations began in May 2014 with the removal of oil from the fuel tanks. After that, the team cut the ship into 8 sections and pulling it from the water piece by piece. The painstaking project was finally finished a year and a half later, in late 2015. Number 3. Nanhai 1. The Nanhai 1 was a Chinese wooden merchant ship that sank off southern China's Guangdong province during the 12th or 13th century, with somewhere between 60 and 80,000 items aboard. It was quickly buried in a thick layer of silt, which kept it remarkably preserved for centuries to come. A joint British and Chinese expedition discovered the ancient wreck in 1987 while searching for a Dutch East India Company vessel. Measuring 100 feet long or 30.4 meters and 32 feet or 9.8 meters wide, it's the largest ship of its kind ever found. It was also the first vessel found along a vital trade route called the Marine Silk Road, which connected China with the Middle East, India, and Africa. Experts are unsure of the exact route the vessel was taking when it sank into the South China Sea. They believe that it left southern China to trade with other countries along the Marine Silk Road when it encountered a brutal storm and went under. In 2007, a salvage team placed the Nanhai 1 into a giant metal box and raised it from the seabed. It was kept inside the box, covered in silt and seawater until excavations officially began. Inside the ship, archaeologists found a trove of valuable artifacts, including porcelain, lacquerware, coins, and gold objects dating back to the Imperial Song Dynasty, which ruled China until 1279. One expert told the press that there were more than enough items to fill a provincial-level museum. Number 2. Vasa. When the Vasa set sail on August 10, 1628, she was the world's most high-tech warship. Commissioned by Swedish King Gustav II Adolf, the ornately decorated vessel was covered in elaborate carvings and had 64 bronze cannons. But Vasa's glory was incredibly short-lived. Minutes into her maiden voyage from Stockholm Harbor to the Swedish island of Alpsbeben, she plunged to the sea bottom less than 400 feet or 122 meters from land. A combination of engineering flaws and heavy winds quickly brought the ship down as hundreds of horrified spectators watched from the shore. 30 people died in the disaster. Authorities tried to raise the wreck shortly after the ship sank, but it had settled in the mud and got even more stuck during the attempted recovery. Finally, in 1961, the Swedish government raised the ship along with thousands of artifacts that were on it when it sank. Around 95% of its wood was intact thanks to the Baltic Sea's cold, oxygen-poor water, which prevents shipworms and bacteria from thriving. Vasa is the only preserved 17th century vessel in the world, according to the Vasa Museum in Stockholm where it's on display. There are several theories about what exactly happened to cause the ship to sink. The king had rushed the building process, and the vessel was designed by someone who had no experience with armed ships. Its gun deck was far too heavy, and it had very little resistance to changes in the wind and waves. Although Vasa never accomplished anything noteworthy since it didn't have a chance to, it lives on as an iconic symbol of Swedish heritage. Number 1. Costa Concordia. The Italian cruise ship Costa Concordia was in the first leg of a Mediterranean cruise in early 2012 when it struck a reef off Isola del Giglio with 3,206 passengers and 1,023 crew members aboard. Captain Francesco Schettino had deviated from the planned route and steered the ship closer to the island to perform a salute as it sailed past. In doing so, he had disabled the alarm system for the Costa Concordia's computer navigation system. He would later claim that he had done this numerous times before and was familiar with the seabed in the area. But his mistake truly proved that human judgment is prone to error. Now, thousands of lives hung in the balance as the ship began to list. A 6-hour rescue effort ensued, and most of the passengers and crew were saved. In a desperate bid to save their own lives, many people swam to the island. Others rushed to lifeboats or were saved by helicopter. Sadly, 27 passengers and 5 crew members died. Captain Schettino left the ship before all the passengers had disembarked, and was ultimately sentenced to 16 years in prison for his role in the disaster and his failure to be the last person off the vessel. Between 2013 and 2014, the Costa Concordia was rolled upright and stabilized using metal beams that were placed onto the seabed. Air was pumped into the ship's caissons to refloat it from the seabed. From there, it was moved to deeper waters and then refloated some more. Finally, the vessel made its way back to its home port in Genoa. The 1.2 billion salvage operation came with a higher price tag than the 600 million cost of building the Costa Concordia in the first place. And even after the wreck was raised and relocated, it still had to be dismantled and scrapped, which took several years. The job of recycling the ship was finally finished in mid-2017.
Number 10. Bravo-class submarine. There are several different names for the 4 Soviet-built Project 960 Kafal-class military submarines. These vessels were built between 1967 and 1970. NATO calls them Bravo-class submarines, and they're also known as Mullet-class vessels. They were designed for use in anti-submarine warfare training exercises, and were also combat-worthy. The Soviet military certainly got good use out of the submarines, which were kept in service for nearly 40 years before they were decommissioned during the 90s. Each diesel-electric powered vehicle was nearly 240 feet long and 32 feet wide. Bravo-class submarines were a lot smaller than the 574-foot-long Typhoon-class subs that the Soviet Union developed less than a decade later in 1976. The only surviving Bravo-class vessel, officially named SS-310, sits at a shipyard in the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson. It was moved there after being decommissioned in 1997 and sold to a private owner, who reportedly planned to display the submarine in a museum. But that never happened, and the Cold War relic was left to deteriorate at its current location. Decades of neglect have taken a toll on the now rusting SS-310, which continues to languish in the water with no apparent future plans. Number 9. McBarge. The Friendship 500, better known as the McBarge, is most famous for its use as a floating McDonald's restaurant for the 1986 World Exposition on Transportation and Communication in Vancouver, British Columbia. Believe it or not, it was the world's first floating McDonald's. The distinction goes to another boat, which served up the classy American cuisine along the Missouri River in St. Louis, starting in 1980. It remained in business until 2000, and nobody knows what happened to the boat. But the 2 floating fast food joints were much different from one another. Unlike other McDonald's restaurants, the McBarge kept its kitchen hidden. Customers' orders were delivered at the front counter of a conveyor belt, adding a futuristic touch to the unique fast food joint. The restaurant's glory days were short-lived. After the expo ended, the McBarge shuttered its doors, never to reopen. It failed to find a permanent home, and the situation worsened in 1991 when the new owners of the site where the boat was moored asked its owners to move it. They relocated the vessel to nearby Burrard Inlet, where it sat, forgotten, for the next decade. Memories of the McBarge resurfaced after its appearance in the 2004 film Blade: Trinity. Things seemed to take a badly needed positive turn in 2010 when developers Howard and Kaylee McKean bought the barge. The couple originally planned to repurpose the derelict boat as a deep-sea museum dedicated to the history of the Pacific Ocean. They even had a name picked out, the Deep Discovery Center, but the project seems to be slow going, if it's still in the plans at all. Nobody has updated the McBarge's official Twitter account since 2017, and as of 2019, the Meekin's vision of converting it into a museum have yet to come into fruition. Its future remains uncertain for now. Number 8. Mi-6 Chopper. During an oil prospecting expedition in 1981, an Mi-6 helicopter stopped to refuel at the Kalimpur base in Russia's Yamalo-Nenets region, roughly 1,500 miles outside Moscow. Just 5 minutes after it took off, the aircraft's engines failed, forcing its pilot to crash land into a swamp. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but the chopper was severely damaged. An investigation revealed that workers at the base had accidentally filled the fuel tanks with a mixture of gas and water, which is what killed the engines. Over 40 years later, the wreck is still sitting in the swamp, and as far as anyone knows, there are no plans to remove it. The MIL Mi-6 was a heavy transport helicopter that was built for both military and civilian use. It was first built in 1959 and was the largest helicopter in production until it was superseded by the MIL Mi-26 in 1980. The colossal chopper is normally flown by a flight crew consisting of at least 5 members and can seat up to 65 armed troops. It can also carry vehicles and other large bulky loads of equipment. Over 900 Mi-6s were built before the model was retired in 2002. Number 7. World War I German U-boat. On the bank of the River Medway in Kent, England, there's a World War I era German U-boat that has sat for over a century. It's believed to be one of over 100 U-boats that surrendered when the conflict ended. Most were scrapped, while others were given to the French Navy, but nobody knows how or why the lone wrecked submarine ended up where it is. Experts have tentatively identified it as U-boat UB-122, which was among the surrendering group. It's possible that the tow line pulling the boat broke during a storm, making it more trouble than it was worth to chase down. UB-122 is the only complete U-boat ever found in British tidal waters, according to marine archaeologist Mark Dunkley, who spoke with Mail Online. But there are no plans to preserve it. Instead, it'll be left in place as a reminder of the ultimate sacrifice that comes with war. Out of 40 known U-boat wrecks in British waters, it is the only one that can be seen. Its visibility changes with the water levels, and it's gained a lot of attention in recent years after a series of harsh storms exposed most of the vehicle. Hey, real quick, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any videos like these. Number 6. Sam Ratalangi PB-1600. Police in Myanmar were baffled when local fishermen spotted a nearby 600-foot-long ghost ship in the Gulf of the Martaban in 2018. It ran aground a few days later, enabling authorities to board and investigate. They quickly noticed the absence of both cargo and crew, and that the ship was rusting and old. It flew an Indonesian flag, and its name, Sam Ratalangi PB-1600, was painted on its side. These were the only signs of the vessel's origins. 2 cables attached to the ship's head revealed that it was being towed before it broke free and went adrift. The Marine Traffic website provided a few additional clues. The Sam Ratalangi was built in 2001, and its last recorded location was off of the Taiwanese coast in 2009. Using radar, the Navy located a tugboat 50 miles from the coast and questioned the 13 Indonesian sailors aboard. They explained that they were recently towing the ship to a scrapyard in Bangladesh when they encountered a heavy storm, which caused the towing cables to break. Instead of trying to get the Sam Ratalangi to its destination, they simply cut their losses and abandoned it at sea. Number 5. Vintage sports car graveyard. Most vintage car enthusiasts would probably think that it's downright crazy to leave a classic Jaguar, Rolls-Royce, Porsche, Benz, or BMW sitting outside, exposed to the elements for an extended period of time. But that's exactly what one car dealer and former racer named Michael Froelich did. In fact, he specializes in restoring classic cars, despite the collection of 50 decaying automobiles that he deliberately placed outdoors on his property near Mettmann, Germany. Froelich traveled the world in search of the rare vintage vehicles, tracking each and every one down personally. He considers the display, which he calls Auto Sculpturen Park, to be a museum of sorts. All the cars are from the year 1950, which is when the eccentric old-timer was born, and they were all parked to the site in the year 2000, when Froelich turned 50 years old. In a 2009 interview with the German magazine Der Spiegel, he described the cars as his brothers. He also revealed that many of them were roadworthy when they were parked on his land, but all it takes is one look to realize that this is no longer the case for any of the cars. What looks like a rotting exhibit and a waste of perfectly good, valuable vintage vehicles is, in Froelich's eyes, an expressive work of art. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Number 4. Out-of-place airliner. Northwest of Chicago, there's an old commercial airliner sitting in the forest. The small white jet, which has a series of 3 orange and reddish lines running across its body, is a British Aircraft Corporation BAC 111. It was built in 1965, according to PlaneLodger. In 1977, it flew for Pacific American Airlines. The plane went into storage in 1998 while under the ownership of Roddick Industries. While the YouTuber failed to disclose its final resting place, local radio station 100.9 The Eagle speculated that the aircraft is in Gilberts or Elmhurst, Illinois. It looks as though its wings were cut off to simplify its journey to the woods, but the story behind why and how it ended up there is largely a mystery. The BAC 111 was a solid model that remained in use among major airlines into the 1990s. After that, many airlines in the Far East and Africa bought the retired vehicles, but the 111 is no longer certifiable as airworthy in most countries, as the last flyable one was taken out of service in 2019. Number 3. Overland Train Mark II. During the 1950s, the US government decided that it would be a good idea to develop a massive off-road land train that was capable of hauling heavy loads of cargo over challenging terrain. It commissioned the Texas-based heavy equipment company LeTourneau for the job, which was meant to help with lodging in the remote wilderness. LeTourneau was tasked with building 3 land trains, the largest among them, known as the TC-497 Overland Train Mark II, measured 472 feet long. It was the largest off-road vehicle ever built. The train contained 4 large engines with a total of 4,680 horsepower. Fully loaded, it was capable of covering a distance of somewhere between 350 and 450 miles. Its 30-foot-tall, 6-wheeled cabin consisted of bathrooms, a kitchen, and sleeping quarters for up to 6 people. The Army began testing the Mark II in 1962. It performed well, but the gargantuan vehicle was slow, traveling at just 20 miles per hour on average. In addition to its speed challenges, the Mark II was rendered obsolete as heavy-duty cargo helicopters started rolling off the production line. The product was abandoned, and the experimental vehicle was never used again. Most of it was sold for scrap, but the control cab remained on display at the Yuma Proving Ground in Arizona. Number 2. TSS Duke of Lancaster. Built in 1956 at the Harland and Wolff Shipyard in Belfast, Ireland, the TSS Duke of Lancaster was a British passenger ferry and cruise ship. It spent its career shuttling passengers back and forth between Lancashire, England, and Northern Ireland. The ship also traveled to numerous leisure destinations, including the Scottish Islands, Belgium, Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, and Spain. Cruise services ended during the mid-1960s, when the Duke of Lancaster was converted into a car ferry as a way to keep up with competition. When renovations were complete, the vessel had a carrying capacity of up to 1,200 passengers and 105 vehicles. In 1979, it was sold to a company based in North Wales. Its new owner planned to turn it into a floating arcade called the Fun Ship. The leisure center had a good run, but it closed in 2004 due to ongoing legal battles with its local council. Subsequent owners faced similar problems, which caused them to walk away from any plans they had to revive the Duke of Lancaster. The ship has languished in the same spot for more than 4 decades now. It's badly rusted and deteriorating, and has become more of an eyesore than it would probably be as an operating business. The games left behind from its days as an arcade were cleared out in 2012. Around the same time, graffiti artists were invited to make their mark on the Duke of Lancaster by adding their own personal touches to the outside. After all, the sight of graffiti beats having to look at a dilapidated, crumbling ship. But the artwork was soon covered over, and there seems to be no future plans for the vessel, leaving one to wonder how long it will sit in decay for before it's either removed from the site or something useful is done with it. And number 1. Eagle Lake and West Branch Locomotives. Northern Maine was once the home of a thriving logging industry. Some remnants of this bygone era are still visible in the region's forests, where you'll find 2 rusting steam-powered locomotives and a collection of old machinery parts. At first glance, the site might resemble a junkyard, but the equipment is left over from its glory days, when it was used for shuttling timber, a vital commodity, through the forest. The locomotives entered service in 1926, when Northern Maine was a major logging hub. They ran day and night to keep up with the industry's demand, stopping for just 10 minutes between loads. But the tramway's golden era was short-lived, and after carrying nearly 1 million cords of pulpwood, the Great Depression shut it down. The 2 locomotives were soon rendered obsolete, and would have cost more to move them out of the forest than it was to simply leave them there. They were parked at Eagle Lake, and therefore forgotten about until they began drawing urban explorers. Even though they were deserted and left to rot, the trains are still maintained today. In 1996, one of the locomotives began leaning hard to one side. Volunteers and government workers worked together to jack it up, restore the track beneath it, and set the train back down to its resting place. The project took 3 years and 5,200 5-gallon buckets of crushed stone, which were carried to the site during the brutal winter cold.
Number 10. Papua New Guinea Tank Graveyard. A pair of World War II-era Japanese tanks sat just 13 feet underwater in the waters off Papua New Guinea for 60 years before they were rediscovered in 2010. Each vehicle weighs around 15 tons and is equipped with a cannon and 2 machine guns. They rested there completely untouched in Makeda Harbor until Swiss diver Franco Bonfi photographed them following their discovery. Tank warfare turned the war in favor of the Allies by giving them an upper hand in several key battles throughout the conflict, including in the South Pacific. The New Guinea campaign lasted from 1942 until the very end of the war in 1945. It started when the Empire of Japan invaded the Australian territories of Papua and New Guinea. The Allies swiftly retaliated and successfully drove the Japanese out of the region. Japan suffered heavy losses and ultimately came out on the losing end of the campaign. While actual combat played a role in the defeat, the greatest suffering resulted from a naval blockade that kept food and medical supplies from reaching the Japanese soldiers who were stationed in the area. Number 9. Baiae. The partially sunken ancient Roman resort town of Baiae can be found 16 kilometers off the coast of Naples, Italy. Baiae, which was once located over natural volcanic vents, was a place for the Roman elite. It boasted healing hot springs, a mild climate, and lush vegetation, as well as luxurious public baths, fancy villas, and other large buildings. Nero, Cicero, Caesar, and other powerful figures were known for visiting Baiae and sometimes even building vacation homes there. During the 8th century, the city was sacked by Saracens, and by 1500 it was abandoned entirely. The ruins of Baiae were slowly submerged, courtesy of a rising water level caused by volcanic activity. Today, Baiae's remarkably well-preserved remains are part of an underwater archaeological park. Visitors have the options of scuba diving among the ruins, snorkeling, or observing the sunken city through a glass-bottomed boat. Number 8. Lion City. Known as China's Atlantis, Xicheng, also called the Lion City, was deliberately flooded in 1959 and was thereafter forgotten about. Situated at the foot of Wuxi Mountain in Zhejiang Province, roughly 250 miles south of Shanghai, the ancient city was built between 25 and 200 AD during the Eastern Han Dynasty. It remained inhabited until the mid-20th century when nearly 300,000 residents were relocated to make way for a man-made lake as part of a hydroelectric power plant construction project. In 2011, the Chinese government decided to explore the site to see what was left of it. To their surprise, Xicheng had not changed much. After laying undisturbed for over half a century, its structures remained perfectly preserved. Underwater explorers discovered 5 entrance gates to the city, as well as 265 archways featuring carved lions, dragons, and inscriptions. The structures at Xicheng date as far back as 1400 years, although many are newer, having originated during the Ming and Qing dynasties, which ruled from 1368 to 1912. Experts believe that the walls surrounding the small 0.2 square mile site were built during the 16th century. Xicheng sits beneath 85 to 131 feet of water, which has protected it from the elements over the last several decades. The site is open to advanced divers, but has not even been fully mapped and documented, meaning more fascinating discoveries await beneath the surface. Number 7. The world's largest submerged airplane. In 2016, an Airbus A300 cargo plane was deliberately sunk off the coast of Kusadesi, a city in western Turkey. The aircraft had recently retired after a long 36 career in the sky before plunging to its final resting place off the Aegean coast, where it functions as an artificial reef for marine life. Measuring 177 feet from nose to tail and with a wingspan of 144 feet, the A300 is the world's largest submerged airplane. Turkish officials made the decision to sink it in a bid to increase tourism to the region by turning it into a dive site. In the handful of years since the aircraft was relocated to its current home, it's become covered in coral and is quickly turning into a thriving aquatic habitat. For the most part, the plane was sunken in its original condition, minus several different safety measures that were taken to eliminate any environmental hazards. And as it turns out, the move to boost tourism worked well. Diving has increased noticeably in the region, presumably due to the rare and unique opportunity to see fish and other creatures living in and around a cargo plane. Have you ever dived into the ocean to see underwater ruins? If so, tell us about it in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Number 6. Chuuk Lagoon Vehicle Graveyard. At the bottom of Chuuk Lagoon, an atoll in the Central Pacific belonging to the Federated States of Micronesia, there's an eerie collection of Imperial Japanese ships, planes, and tanks dating back to World War II. The vehicle sank in February 1944 during a massive air and sea attack that the U.S. Navy launched against Japan. Known as Operation Hailstorm, it saw the destruction of 270 planes and 45 marine vessels. Japan forged diplomatic ties with Micronesia when Japanese sailors were welcomed there during the late 19th century. After World War I, the League of Nations revoked Germany's possession of the region and handed jurisdiction over to Japan, and the country proceeded to turn the islands into a fortified stronghold. The sunken vehicle graveyard at Chuuk Lagoon, formerly known as Truk Lagoon, is a popular diving site. Even the most experienced explorers often spot things they've never seen before, oftentimes after making several previous trips to the site. In addition to the dozens of submerged vehicles, there's a plethora of everyday objects including medicine bottles, plates, and shoes, as well as a myriad of military items including battery guns, gas masks, and ammunition. Number 5. Ximena. Dating back to around 2000 BC, the ancient city of Ximena was a small fishing village during ancient times. Located near the uninhabited island of Kekova of modern-day Antalya, Turkey, the Lycian settlement was also an important trading post. Simena boasted the smallest Lycian amphitheater, a necropolis, shipyard, church, temple, walls, and more. Several of these structures and features sank during the 2nd century when a series of cataclysmic earthquakes gradually submerged the city, which sat right at the water's edge until then. Some of Simena's ruins, including some residential homes and staircases, still peek up from the water, making them visible to the naked eye. The remains of the city's public baths can be found along the shore, boasting an inscription identifying them as a gift from the people to the Emperor Titus. Unfortunately, if you're hoping to view the sunken part of the city up close and personal, you're out of luck. Diving and snorkeling are prohibited at the site, which is a designated specially protected area to protect it from damage. Meanwhile, Simena is on the tentative list of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. You can, however, catch a glimpse of the ruins from above via the occasional tour boats that slow down as they pass through the ancient harbor. The Lycian civilization was unique to the Mediterranean coast of present-day Turkey, making Simena an important archaeological site. Made up of a democratic union of cities known as the Lycian League, Lycia is considered one of the world's first democratic systems. Number 4. Zenobia. The Swedish-built ferry MS Zenobia began her maiden voyage to Syria in May 1980 with 104 tractor-trailers of cargo aboard. After passing through the Strait of Gibraltar a few weeks later and stopping in Greece, the captain encountered steering problems. Soon enough, the ship began listing. The crew discovered excess water in the ballast tanks and pumped it out. They continued towards Cyprus, assuming they had solved the problem. But by the time Zenobia reached the port at Larnaca, it had started listing again. Engineers determined that a software problem was pumping excess water into the tanks. Worried that the 571-foot-long ferry was a danger to other ships, local authorities ordered the captain to leave the harbor. He anchored offshore and the list worsened, forcing the crew to abandon ship. They returned to the harbor, where witnesses claimed they drank at a bar and watched calmly as Zenobia capsized. It took $200 million worth of cargo down with it and scattered 100 trucks on the sea floor. Zenobia is the largest ship to ever sink in the Mediterranean. The crew's unfazed behavior was strange, but things got even weirder when no investigation of the incident was carried out. The ferry's owners never filed an insurance claim, and the cargo was never salvaged. Police suspected that Zenobia was sabotaged. One theory proposes that it was wrecked by British and Israeli secret services, who suspected that it was carrying an illegal arms shipment for the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO. Unfortunately, we may not ever know what happened. The wreck is one of the world's most popular diving sites, attracting over 100,000 visitors every year. Number 3. F-4U Corsair. 2 years after undergoing test flights in 1940, the American-made Vought F-4U Corsair fighter plane went on its first combat missions in Guadalcanal. It saw action during World War II and the Korean War as a carrier-based aircraft, meaning it operated mainly from naval aircraft carriers. Known for its effectiveness, the Corsair was soon in high demand. The French received the final delivery of the aircraft in 1953. It was also used by British, New Zealand, Argentine, and Honduran militaries, just to name a few. Throughout its 11-year production run, nearly 12,600 of the aircraft were produced. Even some Japanese pilots admitted that they thought the Corsair was the most formidable American fighter plane involved in World War II. During a routine training mission in Hawaii in 1948, one of the planes began sputtering. Its engine failed. Thankfully, the quick-thinking pilot safely and smoothly landed the ailing Corsair in the waters off Honolulu. He maneuvered it so gracefully it wasn't even damaged from the impact. While the plane sank to the seabed, the pilot reportedly swam ashore in his life jacket. Today, the submerged Corsair sits roughly 3 miles off the Oahu coast. Decades of being immersed in seawater have taken a toll on the aircraft. At first glance, it looks like all that's left of it is the fuselage, but one of the wings remains intact, half buried in the sand. Despite its decaying condition, the Corsair is a popular site for divers and underwater photographers. It's home to thriving populations of garden eels, jacks, stingrays, and other marine creatures who have repurposed the plane as an artificial reef. Number 2. The Sweepstakes. Built in Burlington, Ontario in 1867, the 119-foot-long wooden schooner Sweepstakes had a short-lived career on the water. In 1885, the vessel's hull was damaged while transporting coal off Cove Island in Lake Huron. From there, it was towed to Big Tub Harbor for repairs, but it would have been costly to fix the ship, and it was deemed not worth saving. The Sweepstakes was stripped of valuables and simply left to sink. In 1885, it plunged to its watery grave with a cargo of coal still aboard, which was later removed. The ship sits under just 20 feet of water in the Fathom 5 National Marine Park in Ontario. It's a popular diving destination due to its accessibility and visibility, but there are limits to how close divers can get to the wreck. Despite being in remarkably good condition, the sweepstakes is deteriorating, and it'll continue to do so. Parks Canada reinforced the hull and deck with metal bars, and the sunken vessel is surrounded by a wire fence to prevent divers from disturbing it. Even though it's starting to fall apart, the sweepstakes is considered one of the best preserved 19th century Great Lakes schooners ever found. It resembled a typical example of one of these commercial sailing vessels, which were popular for being fast with a sizable cargo capacity. Schooners weren't the most impressive-looking ships, but they got the job done efficiently, and that was all that mattered to shippers whose goal was to get their product to its destination. They worked as hard as possible until they were no longer operational, at which point they were usually abandoned, if they didn't wreck and sink first. Number 1. Tangalooma Shipwrecks. There's a collection of 15 submerged boats off the Brisbane, Australia coast that, at first glance, resembles some sort of huge maritime crash. But this was no accident. The Queensland, Australia government deliberately sunk the old dredging ships near Moreton Island between 1963 and 1984 to create a breakwall for small boats. Known as the Tangalooma wrecks, the vessels became a haven for reef fish and other marine life, and coral is starting to form in and around the submerged vessels. Over 100 fish species are found at the site, which is also visited by dolphins and dugongs. The Tangalooma wrecks are becoming increasingly popular with snorkelers and scuba divers as images on social media capture more people's attention than ever before. Situated in crystal-clear tropical waters with high visibility, it's an ideal place for underwater exploration. The wrecks are sometimes visible above the water during low tide. Moreton Island is one of the few inhabited islands near Brisbane and is the world's third-largest sand island. It lacks paved roads and is a haven for tourists, with the Tangalooma wrecks ranking as its top attraction. Thanks for watching. Which one of these places would you most like to see in person? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much, and we'll see you again for another amazing video right here on American Eye.